of plastic tube with the same tie-dye finger painting effect. This is what it looks like. You're just gonna set a little piece of wooden stick. We're just gonna insert it into the end piece, and we're just gonna add the other end. We're going to enhance our bangle by just adding some gold rings. We're gonna start by just putting the gold rings in the joint area. Isn't this unique? Just look at this. This is the finished look of the earrings and the bangle. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. The month of July is plastic free, so I am encouraging you to reduce the use of single-use plastic.
Tourism matters because it is the engine of sustainable development. It is an industry poised to revolutionize our nation.
I'm Jack Spencer, a third-generation fisherman. Our livelihood depends on tourism, not just mine, but I think the whole island. It touches everyone.
Tourism really contributes to the quality of life of our community. Tourists bring dollars, and when there is more money in our community, that means all of us experience a better quality of life.
Tourism for me started 25 years ago. I started off as a waiter in the industry. So many different things have inspired me to become a part of this beautiful industry.
We need to keep our country clean.
When the tourism season starts, a lot of us get jobs. It's benefiting us in a big way.
One of the most important characteristics you must have to work in the hospitality industry is customer service. It is the most important skill you can have, not only in the hospitality sector, but also in life.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Working for You. I am Les Roy Williams. I thank you very much for joining us for today's program. Of course, from week to week, your company is very much appreciated. Today we are going to be having a discussion on a very timely topic, and it has to do with the environment and cooperatives. We do have a ministry, the Ministry of Environment and Cooperatives, and we'll be having a discussion in terms of what that department does and what it intends to do going forward. And I have with me two persons basically from that ministry. I have the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Environment and Cooperatives, Ms. Sharon Rattan. Ms. Rattan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're happy to be here and to be afforded the opportunity to have this discussion.
Thank you. I also have Ms. Cheryl Jeffers, who is a conservation officer in the Department of Cooperatives. Ms. Jeffers, a warm welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here.
Right. Whenever we hear the word environment, we think of sustainability. And today the environment we're hearing more and more of that, and in terms of development, and how everything in terms of development has to take into consideration the environment. Now, a study of geography opens up the debate about whether the environment determines how a society and its culture develops, whether it is the society and culture which impacts the environment, or whether the two, people and the environment, are bound together in a dynamic relationship which produces or creates the environment. And when we talk about the environment, we can talk about the natural physical environment, or we can speak about the built environment. Nonetheless, there is an interaction between people and the environment and people. And we are seeing all the environmental impacts today. We hear a lot about climate change and the effects of climate change and what we are called to do as people and as countries to reduce or to mitigate the impacts of climate change. And so we are going to hear more about the environment. And then, of course, we have cooperatives. And we'll hear more about that, because anytime people have common concerns and face similar struggles, or they're looking for solutions to bigger than they alone can accomplish, people come together in numbers and so on, and they form cooperatives, and we'll hear more about that. But before we go any further, I will ask the Permanent Secretary, Ratan, to sort of give us an overview in terms of the Ministry of Environment and cooperatives.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Williams. We are happy to be here as a ministry that has just been formed. Some persons say, oh, Ministry of Environment and Cooperatives, what is that? Well, it is a small ministry, but we talawa, as we would want to say in our local parlance. The Department of Environment consists of just maybe 18 persons, and cooperatives about 8 persons. But we do carry lots of responsibility. Our minister, our new minister, the Honorable Eric Evelyn, is also very well positioned and well placed to lead this ministry. He has had many years of experience in agriculture, and of course that is one of our key stakeholders and a key critical partner, because of our relationship with the land. We need food, and we have to know how we are going to use the land to get food to feed ourselves. So within this little ministry, Environment and Cooperatives, we see sustainability. We are playing our part to build sustainable pillars for our survival. And of course, we interact with the environment every day. And we are very happy. I think we could start, Mr. Williams, a discussion off with environment, because we are touched by it. We are surrounded with it, whether we are outside or inside. But I think we are dealing mainly with outside. Let's start with outside. And he mentioned the term climate change, and we would see how that discussion goes. And I'm very happy to now segue to Ms. Cheryl Jeffers, who will guide our discussions in that regard. Share with us, tell us, what do we do in the Department of Environment?
Thank you, P.S. Ratan, and thank you, Mr. Williams, and a pleasant good afternoon to the listening and viewing audience. It is indeed a pleasure for me to be representing the arm of the Department of Environment and to shed some light in terms of the day-to-day activities that the Department of Environment undertake. And as you so rightly indicated, the environment is all around us, and it is our responsibility as officers of the department to ensure that the work that is being executed within our office falls in line in terms of what is expected as it relates to sustainable development. If you would realize, we have a motto in the office. It says, conserve, preserve, and protect. And that motto was generated recognizing the mandate of the Department of Environment, which is primarily to conserve the environment, to preserve what we have left of our resources, taking into consideration sustainability, and if necessary, to protect the environment for lives ahead to come. You would have mentioned earlier in terms of climate change, the Department of Environment stands on 3 main broad pillars, climate change being one of them, biodiversity being one of them, and ozone being another one of them. And from those 3 large pillars, then there are subsections within those relevant focus areas, recognizing that most of the multilateral United Nations agreements, the focal points within those agencies rest within the department. And I think it was strategically done that way to ensure that there's coordination and efficiency and avoiding duplication of those responsibilities. And so if there are any specific questions in terms of what do we do at the Department of Environment? As indicated in terms of conservation, the work of the Department of Environment, we see ourselves as coordinating some of the activities, because we cannot do it alone. It requires us to have that level of collaboration and consultation with everyone, civil society, government, private sectors, and children. And as such, most of the work that we do, we have an environmental education officer whose responsibility for the most part is to share and disseminate information as relates to the environmental matters that affect us on a day-to-day basis. In terms of preservation, we do a lot in terms of promoting the need for us to conserve what we have in terms of our natural resources. We do in terms of preservation also when it comes to water efficiency, water conservation practices. And in terms of protection, our key areas for that relates to our Central Forest Reserve, which is protected by law. And it is done because most of our water is generated through that activity in terms of the Central Forest Reserve and the government site necessary for us to implement such a policy to ensure that that level of sustainability in terms of the forest is protected. That is just one of our protected areas, but by large, one of the largest areas in terms of protection. Another area that we have serious concern relates to the protection of our guts. Many persons have different definitions of guts, but I think the general public have an understanding in terms of what a gut is, and the primary role of a gut is to ensure that you have that level of stabilization to avoid land slippages when and where necessary, particularly if we have heavy incidents of rainfall. And as such, I just want to use this opportunity to encourage persons, when we have our conservation officers who are speaking to you out there in terms of what you can, should and should not do in terms of the use of the gut. We want to implore you to listen to us because we are not speaking just for us, but for every citizen within the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Right. So there we go. We recognize the importance that our care and conservation for the environment, how important that is. Now, environmental degradation, Mr. Jeffers. Of course, we have the degradation of the environment, which really is when we lose some of the degree of the quality in the air and the land and the waters. You spoke to some of that. And of course, we also have conservation. We have to have environmental conservation practices if we are not to have environmental degradation. Now, you spoke to some of the conservation practices of the department, which are very important. Now, we have had an issue with rainfall for a period of time now. We are not getting the very same rainfall that we used to get over a period of time. And that creates, of course, drought conditions.
Yes.
These conditions, in turn, the drought conditions, affect not only humans, it affects plant life, and it affects animal life. Now, what is being done in terms of, because we can say that the droughts that we are having is as a result of the impact of climate change. What is being done in terms of water conservation?
In terms of, yes, you're correct. Drought-like conditions is one of the results of climate change. And in 2017, the government took that initiative, which we are proud to report on, that we developed a national climate change policy. And in that document, it outlined the process and procedures that we as a citizen must go in terms of addressing climate change. In that document, it highlighted the key sectors that are affected, and you have highlighted some of them in terms of water. And in terms of the impacts, it can be drought-like conditions in some areas, but it would also be flooding, as we would have recognized would have taken place a few weeks ago. And so in terms of that, because climate change affects every single one of us as a people, it requires us from the Department of Environment to have that level of coordination and collaboration with every sector. So what we've done within that document when it was prepared, we've had consultations with the key experts within the relevant sectors that we recognize could be impacted, and we empower them with the information in terms of this is what can be done and what can be affected within your particular sector. And we allow them as the experts within that specific sector to take the lead, and we play a supporting role as it relates to providing that information. So for instance, in terms of water department, we've had several projects that we have implemented with the water department. One that we would have done a few years ago was a RAC project. And for what it did for the most part, even though it was climate change related, it was a focus on water department. So we had them taking the lead and we supporting. And in that project, we were able to have a few retrofitting devices that were implemented or installed rather in government buildings. We had at least 2 primary schools that were able to get low flush toilets, and those devices that has timers on them that allow the water to turn off after a particular time, because as kids, we love to play with water, and if we don't put a system in place that allows the water to shut off at a particular time, it will just run and run. So what we've done for that particular activity, we actually had a campaign called Just Do One Thing. I think it still plays on the ZIZ radio and television in terms of just do one thing. It can be to turn off the tap when you're brushing your teeth, turn off the pipe when you're soaping up and you're taking a shower, use a bucket, stuff like that when you're washing your car instead of having the hose running. As relates to water and agriculture, we encourage persons to practice activities such as drip irrigation as a water conservation practice, and it is also described as an adaptation response, because you mentioned climate change earlier, and even though St. Kitts and Nevis is not one of the reasons why we actually have climate change occurring, we are at the end of it where we see the brunt of the impacts, and as such, what we have to do as people is to build our resilience, and it is called adaptation. So we have most of what we do at the office requires collaboration in terms of we empower the sectors that are directly impacted, and then we work with them to ensure that we have that level of coordination to ensure that we have lives and activities in years to come for future generations. But for the most part, it requires collaboration. As Ms. Watan had said earlier, the department, yes, it is small, and yes, we are Talawa. We have a lot of work going on, but it requires us to have that level of engagement and involvement with all sectors, not just the public, but also the private sectors.
Yes.
Can I just
sure,
make
go
a
right
little,
ahead,
just to expand on what Ms. Jeffers said, because one of the things, based on what she said, you would note is that we play a lot of supporting roles, very often in the background, but a key role, nevertheless, in terms of getting that task, that critical work done in terms of changing behavior or putting any mitigating factor in place. Now, I just want to point out to the public that yes, they do a lot of work, and a lot of work has been done in the area of environment in all aspects, from conservation to water conservation. And recently, we saw the impact of one for a project that was completed where the schools, 17 primary schools, 18 primary schools, throughout St. Kitts and Nevis benefited, where the large water tanks were installed in the schools, and in some instances, more so in Nevis, we had systems being improved upon. And in Keon in particular, Keon High School in particular, had a system. And that example, you know, persons may say, oh, they have tanks, and they may not understand what the work that went in on the back end in order to provide that. And that service, or that mitigated structure, because it means then that if water has to be disrupted for some reason, you won't have to send the children home. So it would not cut the hours in school. You can be assured that you don't have to call parents to say, well, we have to turn off water because send home children because water had to be turned off because they may have been doing work in the area or there's a problem. So you can rest assured that the children will remain in school. And it is important that be pointed out, because that's an adaptation measure, and it also impacts their contact time. You're ensuring that you keep the contact time that they need in school. Thirdly, it is also a mitigating measure in the form that we are getting less rainfall. So in the event that we have maybe a storm pass, or maybe a flood for 2 days, we can be guaranteed that the school will have water, at least for a good 2 to 3 days. And the work was done, so depending on the size of the schools, they got the amount of water that will be required per school, or not only per school child, but the staff and students in the school. So I just wanted to point out that so persons can have an appreciation that when they see the tank, it wasn't just put there, but that research that went in, those needs that are being addressed to ensure that we have water.
Certainly. Ms. Jeffers, climate change has become so politicized around the world. There's a lot of politics at play in it. And we see that those developed countries, those industrialized countries with a higher level of pollution because of the industries that they have, a higher level of greenhouse gas emissions, and so on, that they're at the table, they're playing politics. Climate change is happening. Some believe it, some don't. Some big countries have pulled out of such climate change agreements.
Paris Agreement.
And the Paris Agreement and the COP 2021, and all these names that we have for them. But at the very same time, while they're playing politics, it is the small island developing states that are having a lot of these impacts.
Yes.
So how it is that we can have a greater voice at the table when it comes to climate change, because we are having more hurricanes, and they are more powerful. We are having rising sea levels because of global warming. A lot of our islands, small island developing states, they are coastal. How do you see this?
Thanks very much for that question. It is an interesting question, and you are correct. From the climate change perspective, at the what you call the COP level, which is the Conference of Parties, they are negotiating groups and bodies. And as you mentioned, the Small Island Developing States, there's a group called AOSIS, which is an Alliance of Small Island Developing States. And what we do, we use that same argument that you've just alluded to in terms of we are at the brunt of the impacts. We are not the cause of the impacts, but we're at the brunt of the impacts. And what we've recognized that we have to do is to try and use perhaps the same argument against them in terms of a policy level. Because when it comes to voting, it is one vote per country. And as a small island developing states, you're talking about 50-something countries. And so we use that political statement. So when we have to negotiate, we negotiate in a block, because we recognize that we have the same challenges. Outside of that, one of the concerns that we have, though, is that some of the developed countries have been strategic in terms of, they've indicated, oh, yes, you know, we are helping you, but our thing is that whilst we welcome the help, what we really want is for you to be more robust in reducing your greenhouse gas emissions. And based on the technology and the research that has been out, it is showing that renewables is becoming much cheaper than before, because that was one of the arguments that persons have used before in saying that fossil fuel is cheaper. Depends on which country you're from, of course, but the research has been showing that the alternatives which relates to reducing our greenhouse gases is becoming cheaper. So what we can do from that level is continue the argument, continue the fight, because it was because of the champion that was led by the Alliance of Small Island Developing States for the most part. It's one of the reasons why we were able to actually get a Paris Agreement, because there were some countries that were ready to pull out at the last minute. It was a tough fight, but it was one that was worth it. So from our end, in terms of the negotiations, the most we can do for now is to continue the dialogue, stay at the front, to some extent, keep bugging them, reminding them that, you know, because you're right, there are some islands in the Pacific that has disappeared, for want of a better term, because of the increase in the sea level. So from a political point of view, what we do is encourage all heads of governments or ministers, whenever the opportunity presents itself, be that voice to remind them that we are losing our people, we are losing our coast, we are losing our livelihoods, and we need to continue that argument and that voice, because it has to be led at the top. We as technical persons can make that negotiation, but when it comes to the table with the heads, we need that representation also at that level to ensure that our voices continue, because for how the Conference of Parties operates, you have the technical negotiations, we try to sort out those issues, but when it comes to the final ones, we're left out, and it requires the ministers. And so our strategy is to try to get as much ministers as possible at that table to ensure that our voices are continued and speak on.
Right. Now,
Mr. Williams?
Go ahead.
There is a trickle effect there that as small island developing states, we have to address our mind too. Because whilst that political action, reaction is going on, the pressure, we bear the brunt of the pressure to deal with stronger hurricanes, rising sea levels, and that kind of thing. Flooding. Droughts. It puts more pressure on us. And that little bubble of pressure is a challenge for small island development states. And this is why, having come from the political level, while Ms. Jeffers was talking, I am thinking, what does this mean to the average man? And what is the role of the ministry/department in bringing it to them? And this is what would influence how we proceed in 2021, apart from dealing with the political level, the negotiations, etc. We have to make the effort and invest in more energy to ensure that our citizens assess their behaviors. Because that is what it would take, because at the end of the day, we have the least emissions in the Caribbean, but we face the brunt of what is happening. So we have to be ever more cognizant of what actions we take to change the behavior of our citizens in terms of our responses to the environment. So let us plug that.
Yes, and any development paradigm today has to take into consideration the environment, because we have to speak about sustainable development, not just about today, but for generations to come. And sustainable tourism, sustainable agriculture, sustainable fisheries, whatever it is, sustainability must be a factor. And even with tourism, yesterday at the Prime Minister's press conference, I heard the Minister of Tourism, Transport and Ports, the Honorable Lindsay Grant, mention in terms of 2 ships that are supposed to come here. And one of the things, of course, is that, you know, sludge. He said they will have to put sludge off before they come. Now, and I imagine that it is oil sludge. Now, when you hear that, you think of the environmental impact on human beings and so on.
Marine resources.
And marine resources. And these are some of the things with our tourism. When we build, are we destroying our coral reefs? Are we destroying our natural habitats? And so on. And these things must play we may not think that they're a problem while we're doing it. But later down the road, we realize we're basically not destroying just the environment, but if we're destroying the environment, we're destroying ourselves.
Very good point.
If I may, to respond to that, the process and the protocol that exists right now through the Development Control and Planning Act, it speaks to the nature of, depending on the nature of your activity and development, it requires an environmental impact assessment to be done. If there's also outside of that, within that assessment, you are to look at those areas that you would have mentioned and highlight what mitigation actions, depending on the level of activity, if it is something that is minimal, if it's something that is significant, and to address what type of mitigation measures that one can put in place. Outside of that, any development, depending on the size of the development, requires a process to go through the Development Control and Planning Board. And on that board, the Department of Environment is represented. And so we would expect that, depending on the nature of the development, if there are cause or any red flags that are highlighted depending on the scope of the project, then the department would be then required to make an intervention to highlight that it's not that we're trying to block an activity, but it must be done in a sustainable manner to address the same concerns. So those systems are already in place. So I would assume that based on the comment you made about the sludge, some sort of protocol would have been in place to ensure that there's a proper handling and disposal of that sludge within the environment.
Right.
Because there's ways and mechanisms that things can be done. You know, you grow up thinking that you would have seen mangroves, for example, and whilst from the environment perspective, yes, you know, it has its uses, and we should try to refrain from developing. Technology has now allowed us to build within the environment without impacting the environment, and so these are what we expect the board to look at to ensure that whatever activity that is done within a sustainable manner to avoid as much as possible of damaging the environment.
Right. What about ships passing through our waters with toxic material?
With that one, and it comes back again to the role of the department, it's all about collaboration, because you're talking about 2 or 3 or 4 different ministries that will require consultations with the Department of Environment, Maritime Affairs, Marine Resources, and depending on whomever flag that the ship is under, it requires that level of coordination. So it comes back to the point of the Department of Environment has an intimate and integral role in terms of ensuring that our natural resources are protected and preserved, but it requires the support of any other agencies and other ministries. So we need to be able to be all at the same table, singing from the same hymn sheet for
right.
that,
and,
yes.
And basically, we're trying to protect the environment.
Yes.
Yes.
Because, for example, the blue economy, we depend a lot on the ocean
yes.
for our livelihood.
Yes.
And we are seeing today where there is a lot of pollution of our oceans. And one of the things that is coming to the fore more than ever is that of plastic pollution and how plastic finds its way into our oceans. Now, according to earth.org, in 1950, the world produced more than 2 million tons of plastic per year. In 1950. By 2015, this annual production swelled to 419 million tons. So we are seeing the increase in plastic pollution, and what we have been seeing is a lot of plastic getting into our oceans and water pollution, ocean pollution, affecting our marine life and so on. I know that the Ministry of Tourism has been doing a lot of
Plastic for July.
Yes, Plastic for July and so on, to raise awareness of the issue. I know that in our shopping and so on, we use a lot of plastic. Sometimes you buy the bread is already in a plastic, and then they put it in 2 other plastics, and we end up with an accumulation of plastics that somehow... Why is this a problem, Ms. Jeffers? And what is being done about it?
Before Ms. Jeffers gives the details on that, what is being done, we have in principle support from Cabinet to implement a single plastic use ban. Yes. Okay, that would be, we can look forward for that in 2021. Because the research has been done, they have acknowledged it, and we recognize that many other islands in the Caribbean have addressed this matter. But we have the benefit of learning from them, because it is not just a decision by the stroke of a pen. There are many other factors one has to consider. You see, you said how many tons, 4 point some?
Yes, it's a lot of...
Yes, that's because...
419 million tons.
Yes, 90 million tons. That's because we've had world population increase, and there are many needs, there are many inventions of new things, and you have to find plastics to use to do it. It's cheaper than many other alternatives. So we can look forward to that in 2021. And I'll let Ms. Jeffers discuss some of the implications of why we would do it on a phased basis.
Thank you. And just to say, support the point from P.S. Rattan, plastic, in a nutshell, is cheap. And one of the things we don't want to let the public know is that in terms of plastic is not all bad. There are certain things that we use on a day-to-day basis that plastic is the best option in terms of what we use. So what we from the department will be proposing is to ban the single-use plastic. For example, you buy a bottle of water, you drink the water, you throw away the plastic bottle. That is what we are trying to discourage. In terms of, as Ms. Rattan indicated, in principle, Cabinet has provided that level of support for us to ban the single-use plastic. And we recognize that something like this requires a phased approach, because there are various levels of stakeholders who will be impacted on this. I mean, we can talk about, we're speaking about Ministry of Environment and Cooperatives. The Cooperatives Department, as in terms of the agro-processors, will be significantly affected. You walk around Bastille and everyone who's trying to make a dollar selling local beverages or packaging something, and so we need to take that into consideration in terms of how will they be impacted, and to what extent, and what mechanisms and measures we can put in place to offset some of the challenges. For us to do that, it requires, again, consultations and collaborations, and a key stakeholder within this consultation will be the Ministry of Finance, because everything at the end of the day is about dollars and cents. And so what we intend to do in terms of 2021 is to continue that dialogue, get persons, the general public, to give us their impressions in terms of what they think can be an alternative. I'm not that young, but I'm not that old, because I remember my times of going to buy bread in a paper bag. And so perhaps that might be something that we may have to resort to. And so you're talking about, but we have become a creature of our own habit in terms of, persons may say, you know, I'm accustomed to buying my bread in a plastic bag because it lasts longer. If I buy a sliced bread, after 2 days, it becomes dry and it's no longer good use. So there are benefits towards some plastic, but there are others that I think that as a government and as a country, we can ban in terms of, for instance, the single-use plastics as leads to the bottles, the straws. So what we'll be doing for 2021 is continue the stakeholder engagement, look at what we call as the low-hanging fruits. We don't need straws, do we? So that could be one of the first things that we can implement in terms of banning, something as simple as straws. And there's 1 or 2 places that I've been to in St. Kitts and Nevis who have already started that process in terms of alternatives. They're the metal straws that you can reuse, so you can walk with your own metal straw if you so desire to walk with a straw. There's some that can make from the corn syrup that can use. So one of the things that we recognize it's going to require some serious behavioral changes out of what we consider to be the norm. So persons, we will get some resistance, but at the end of the day, if we try to encourage and let them know that at the end it's for the greater good of not just us but for the environment, we're hoping that we can get that level of support from the general audience. But stakeholder engagement is our first and most important step to ensure, because we don't want to be rubbing things down their throat or shoving things down their throat, and to ensure that we have that dialogue for them to give their input as well. Because persons perhaps may have already started their own research, and they may have information that we don't have, so that level of consultation will be able to address those issues as well.
Yes,
Right, so
and I have been emphasizing a heavy dose of awareness, and we have to challenge ourselves to be creative with that level of awareness. We have discussed that it cannot just be, oh, you have a ceremony to say we are going to do this. We really have to work from the bottom up with this level of awareness, because as Ms. Jeffers pointed out, this is going to be a behavior change. And all is not lost by going, addressing it maybe in the last phase. In terms of the other Caribbean islands, we are looking to learn from them so that, we can go about it in a more strategic way. Okay, so we can look forward to that, because I have to tell you as a citizen, I am not pleased with the amount of plastic I see hanging about the streets. When I do walks or jogs, the beaches, we did a beach cleanup recently with the Taiwanese embassy. Oh, the amount of plastic. And even in the little trails where people jog, too much plastic. Not only plastic, KFC, Burger King, plastic, styrofoam. They're all about in our mountains. They're all about. And we really have to make an effort to become, as I say, better environmental stewards. Because at the end of the day, we have to connect why we are doing this with your daily activity.
Yes. At one point, I used to see we were having a lot of fires or bush fires and that sort of a thing. And air pollution. You see, because sometimes people think, oh, it's just a fire, it's just another cane fire. Whether it was, these were purposefully lit, or whether they were caused by the extreme heat. And so on. Perhaps, we don't know. But at the very same time, those kinds of fires, what are they doing to the quality of air?
Yeah. I think you've asked the question and answered the question indirectly. Some of the fires, I can say that some are from natural combustion, perhaps because of the same heat that you have mentioned, and it can be some link to climate change in terms of prolonged heat and prolonged dry spells. I'm hearing showers as we speak, and
yes,
I'm indeed thankful for it, because there have been a few days of dry spells. But in terms of one of the areas that we have never done much research on, or in terms of data collection, is on our air pollution. We've started the discussions with the CFBC, Dr. Nerin, and his team in terms of what we can put forward as a project, because the Department of Environment and other ministries, one of the things, St. Kitts and Nevis, we can say fortunately and unfortunately, has been regarded as high income, and because of that, it excludes us from accessing certain types of financing. And so we have to be strategic in trying to get grant funds. And so something like that would require collaboration with the technical persons with other agencies, the Bureau of Standards, Ministry of Health, the CFBC. But one of the things that we would need is data, and that has been one of our challenges in terms of access, not just for air quality, but even as it relates to the cabinet submission that we would have forwarded to the cabinet as it relates to the plastic. We required that, we recognize that for us to be able to make a case, we can't just go and just talk. We have to have supporting data to justify why, and for that, thankfully for the last perhaps 10 years or more, we have been engaging in an annual beach cleanup. So for that, it was a quick sell to the cabinet in terms of looking at the trends of increased plastics that have been collected. So it comes back to the point in terms of air pollution. We have not yet started that type of data collection, but what we do collect at the office is every 4 years we are expected to provide a report called a greenhouse gas inventory, and based on that report it collects data in terms of what has been our emissions in terms of perhaps methane, carbon dioxide and stuff like that, but that all is encompassing. So but in terms of air quality, that level of data has not yet been collected, but it's something that we have been discussing with CFBC in terms of how we can address that, particularly within the Basel area, which is heavily built.
Yes, but there are other areas too, Ms. Jeffers, if you recall, that there's that level of awareness going on. Like, for example, those persons who do refrigeration and ACs, workshops have been held with them with the types of gases that can be imported and those that they should not use. There are some of them that require a license, and there is not a connection, there's a relationship with customs. Some customs officers have been trained on, what gases or refrigerants could be allowed into the country. So little by little we are extending our reach so that you spread that level of awareness going forward. Right. And there will be more going forward.
Right. Now, why is it so important? Because sometimes we don't hear that. Why is it so important for us to take care of our environment? In other words, we are stewards of the environment. Why is it so important that we be good stewards of the environment? And how can we be better stewards of the environment? Because sometimes people don't always understand what their behavior is doing to the environment. And sometimes they may just think, well, it's my behavior. But if you have everybody doing it, if it becomes a culture, then you're going to have quite a problem later on.
Before you go, just let me come into the ministry. She'll give you the more technical perspective, but I'll give you a perspective that I have generally, because as you spoke, I'm thinking about the schools and education, and everybody said, oh, they need to start to teach it in schools, but they do. Every aspect of what we have discussed here you can find in curricula from the primary up to the secondary schools. I just think maybe it's the lens we see it through, because we are just looking at it perhaps, well, we are teaching so that they could be tested. But we are not challenging ourselves to look at whether the environment in which we live, are we applying what we know to our behaviors? Why is it, and I think the bigger challenge is, why is that not translating to changed behavior? I have taken this position to environment, and in the next year, in terms of the education, I don't particularly like the term environment education officer, because I think it's a bit limiting, but I am challenging them because we have a lot of data. Are we really using it to support the curriculum or to show our citizens? Okay, an effort has been made. There's an ABC. I think we are developing an environmental ABC. Alphabetic thing, looking at the different species of things, plants and animals that live here. And things like that we need to develop. That's where our efforts need to go in. Developing that could be resources for the schools. That could also be resources we put out on social media in terms of the technology we live in. So we too have to do some introspection of how can we get out the data to the schools, CFBC, and the general public in terms of how it would affect our behavior, how that would translate. Because I believe people know, but they know because they learned this in school to do a test, and then they just leave it there. And they're not recognizing that all these stronger hurricanes and all these challenges we have to do with how we treat the environment. That's because we ourselves are adding pressure to the environment. So you can give your more technical answer.
Not only that, we're adding pressure to the environment, but then the environment turns around and adds pressure
to us
on the society, and that is the whole thing. If Mother Earth is angry,
she will
at
respond
the way
accordingly.
that she is being treated, then she will unleash her fury.
Yes, she will.
And we are seeing that.
Yes, just in your opening remarks, you had made a very powerful statement in terms of the relationship between humans and environment. And I think we need to care for the environment because we depend on the environment to survive. In a nutshell, we can look at it at various scopes and different lenses. We know the impacts of littering, and I'm imploring everyone here. I know, sometimes you walk along the street and persons may want to litter, and it's like, oh, that's somebody else's job to pick it up. It's like, no, we need to be more environmental stewards and try to, as much as possible, be conscious before you drop something on the street or in any particular area. You should be responsible for your own garbage.
Yeah, that's a real issue.
Yes.
And apart from it affecting the environment and so on, it also speaks to having a lack of pride.
Pride, yes.
A lack of pride in your surroundings, a lack of pride, where you live, a lack of pride in terms of how you consider space and place and so on,
Yes, because there's various sectors. If you look at the environment, it impacts every sector and our livelihood. Look at the health implications. You mentioned about the air quality in terms of that. We look at how the tourism product will be affected. We look at agriculture. If you don't care for the environment and handle the environment properly, it boils down to food security. So in the end, I think that is the message we need to get to the general public. If you don't care for the environment, as you so rightly said, Mother Earth will unleash her wrath on us. And I think based on what several videos were being circulated after the COVID and the shutdown, and we've seen how nature responded when they did not have that invasive species, for want of a better term, which being humans. Because the environment doesn't necessarily need us as much as we need the environment to survive. It will do what it has to do in its natural course. But we need the environment to survive for food, clothing. I mean, those were the basic things that we were taught in primary school. We need to, in terms of needs, everything that we need comes through the environment in some shape, form, or fashion. And it is for us to recognize that and to act accordingly.
Well, and you've mentioned a very good point in terms of COVID-19, because, COVID, as President Trump would say. And really and truly, the whole world has become so focused on COVID. And how COVID-19 and how we were called to behave has impacted the environment. We are told that there had been a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions and so on. So we can understand how humans really impact the environment. But at the very same time, what is it teaching us, COVID-19, about the environment, our behavior, and all of that? Because we are seeing now more than ever how one person's behavior can affect others.
Yes, I agree. And just to support the point you had made in terms of the impacts of COVID and the greenhouse gases, we as small island developing states can use that example to demonstrate that we're not just talking just because of the impacts that we receive even prior to COVID, but we can demonstrate that the actions that have been limited because of COVID is in a fact for us to recognize that we as a people, because there's only one planet unless someone knows of a planet that exists that I'm not aware of, but there's no, because we have this discussion we use in the climate change, there's no planet B, there's just one planet. So we have to, not just within our country, but globally, we have to work with each other. The many years before, it took us months before we can get a letter. Now in a split second, you can communicate with persons out there. And so everything now becomes interconnected. And so, but I do recognize that because of COVID, we have enough testimonies out there to recognize that if we as a people need to ensure that we have natural resources and livelihoods for years to come, we must respect the environment in terms of let the trees grow towards their healthy mature stage so we can have clean air. Let the natural processes take place for us to have fresh, constant water. Let the animals do what they have the understanding amongst their food chain in terms of what shall eat and what shall be eaten. That is quite understandable, but I think for the most part, we as humans do not respect the environment enough. And water, which is I think one of the most powerful forces, will unleash its wrath when it gets upset and frustrated.
Right, and Ms. Jeffers, we are learning that the importance of keeping our environment clean, and how in keeping our environment clean, it cuts down on the spread of viruses. And so therefore we are hearing that, sanitize. You must sanitize your environment. You must clean your surfaces and all of that sort of things, which speaks to how we must keep our environment clean. If we don't keep our environment clean, that leads to the propagation of viruses, diseases, the increase in rodents and other insects that can be harmful to humans and so on.
I think that the typical human being is more responsive to actions, near-term actions. So because of COVID, I mean, it's all around us for those of us who listen to the radio and our television, and we know if we don't do this, the impacts are real and imminent. Unlike climate change, which is a slow onset event, it takes a while for you to actually see some of the impacts, and so the typical human being appears to need much more convincing. I think, based on what we've seen in terms of what happens, let's just say go back to 2 years in terms of with Dominica, with Irma and Maria, I don't think we as the Caribbean people need more evidence than what we've been receiving. Every year when we try to recuperate from one hurricane, by the time we're ready to put on our roof, hurricane season comes back again. We've seen changes in our precipitation patterns. The farmers are confused in terms of they don't know when to plant, what to plant, because what used to be the dry season is now any season. We have heavy incidents of rain, and some farmers in terms of adaptation may actually have systems to catch and store water for the drier periods. But I think for the most part that the typical citizen, if it doesn't impact them now, it's like, oh, I can wait until tomorrow. But the COVID is real. I think everybody recognizes that. So they would sanitize, they would wear the mask, because it is now. But for climate change, for the most part, it is a slower process, and so it takes a little bit more convincing. But if you look at the general behavior,
the same principle is involved.
It is, yes. If you look at when you, like for instance, during the hurricane season, you look at human behavior. If there's some sort of tropical storm warning out, everybody rushes to the supermarket, and this tropical storm decides to take a reroute, or they give us false information and they get upset and they're frustrated. But what they need to recognize is just a prediction and a possibility, not that it will happen.
It's a hazard.
Yes. And so what we try to do is, as Ms. Martin indicated, try to get them to really understand that outside of the impacts, it is just something that you must do just because you love your country. Nothing else other than that.
Yes.
That is enough for us as a people. It should be enough for us as a people, but so moving for 2021, we will be ramping up our outreach to from the smallest of children to the eldest of persons, and also to even get information from the elderly in terms of what used to work then, because I recognize that most of the activities that we're doing now, for the most part, is going back to what they used to do many years ago, and you have to ask yourselves, why did we change if it was working?
Yes.
Perhaps influence from external resources and information and technology has its advantages, but it also has its disadvantages. But based on what we've been recommending thus far, in all the sectors, we recognize that we have to go back to basics if we want to basically survive for years to come.
Yeah, but where we are in the world, in the Caribbean and so on, it is important that we develop geographical awareness. And geographical awareness really means that we are aware of our environment, our impact on the environment, and the impact of the environment on us. We should be aware of the environmental hazards that we face, hurricanes and droughts and soil erosion and all of those sorts of things, and to put measures in place so that they don't have to reach to the level of environmental disaster.
Yes. Correct.
Where people are being killed and property and all of that is being destroyed. Now, we had a lot of rain the other day, and it can be considered in a certain sense an environmental disaster. We had a house over in the Fort Tyson Rise area that because of all that rainfall and so on, there was soil erosion, which really undermined that house. We have this situation down at Old Road with the hillside, and when it rains heavily, you have stones that are falling down and rocks that are falling down. All of those things are because those are environmental impacts and they affect people. You know?
Perhaps we are caught in, the progressiveness of the world, the instantaneous, world, and I think we have to bring that balance because, right now, you have a development. You see jobs first. You see the importance of having that development to address those other challenges. You're trying to provide jobs, etc. But we have to take a pause and say, well, should that development be over there? What are the impacts? What are the impacts for the surrounding community, in 20, 50 years or 20, 30 years?
Yeah, what are we doing in terms of flooding, for example? We know that there are certain areas that are very prone to flooding. For example, College Street Gut.
Okay. But that's a natural waterways.
It is a natural waterways, but we do recognize the challenges, and there's actually a project that is being implemented through the Department of Environment. For short, we said IEECO, but it's integrated land management ecosystems. What it basically does is to address the same issues we have just mentioned in terms of gut stabilization. And so if anyone chooses to drive in that general area on the F.T. Williams Highway that crosses over the College Street Gut, you will see some gabion baskets. And what it does is to provide that support and stability towards that area. And come back to the same issue of guts. We have had some challenges in terms of indiscriminate dumping in the guts, and everything that is uphill will eventually go downhill, especially with it being a natural water course. We've had persons grazing the animals in the guts, which is not something that we support. Even building in the guts.
Yes, there was one.
And without permission and authorization. And so it comes back to that point where outside of sensitizing the general public, the departments and the ministries need to speak to each other. They need to have that dialogue, because no one department can do anything. It requires that level of coordination and collaboration and create the necessary enabling environments to ensure that at the end of the day, you can look at a project and say, there goes a level of coordination, and there goes the government has a development plan looking at 2030, 2050 with some sort of vision. But if we continue to work in silos, it will look it will look ad hoc, and it appears as if we're not talking to each other, and the impacts will be greater. And then the question comes, who will foot the bill in terms of addressing the issue? So if you have that level of coordination before implementation, it will help in terms of future years to come, in terms of finances as well.
Yes. Okay, there is coordination. I don't want people not to think, but I believe going forward in 2020, we have to strengthen it, because we see in 2021, oh my, I need 2020 to finish. 2021, we would like to strengthen it, because in anything you would have some gaps.
Yes.
And we would want to improve that.
Okay, we are going to go to the phone lines. We'll continue with discussion, but we want to see if people want to call in and to share with us. The numbers to call are 466-2666. That's 466-2666, 662-8674, 662-8674, 767-4765, 767-4765, and 1-239-645-4500. That's 1-239-645-4500. That's the overseas number. We await your calls.
In the meantime, we have to segue into our cooperatives. Let us not
Yes,
forget that.
I right. So the ministry is also one. It's environment we spent a lot of time on, but also cooperatives. Now, Ms. Rattan, could you tell us what are cooperatives?
Cooperatives are groups that come together on the premise of trust and cooperation and commitment, just in general, to improve whatever activity they choose and to try to make a better product of it. But as I would want to make that segue from environment to cooperatives and COVID, they seek self-reliance. And COVID-19 has taught us that we have to become a bit more self-reliant. We have a call, I think, and so we'll pause here for
We have a caller. Working for you, good afternoon. We have lost that caller, but please feel free to call back.
Yes, I was speaking about self-reliance. COVID-19 taught us that, and I think our state in the environment generally is saying to us, you have to learn to be self-reliant and shape whatever you are doing based on what is before us, the situations, be it water or flooding over there. We have to make better decisions about what we are going to do. So that, in a nutshell, cooperative shares that.
Right. We have that caller.
Working
for you, good afternoon.
Yes. Good afternoon, Roy.
Good afternoon, sir.
And your colleagues at the table here, I hope they know what kind of man you be. A serious prosecutor, they can't get away with nothing. Okay.
Okay.
Now, my question is, do we still have a building board department? And if so, how come they're allowing people to build in the gut? And while we are trying to keep our environment as clean as we can in our little small islands, is there anybody out there checking on Brazil and Australia and those countries up there with these big thousands of acres of fire ever so often? And again, vehicles on the road, they should not be allowed to be on the road once they are throwing carbon monoxide out of the exhaust, polluting the atmosphere. So I want to know if anybody or any organization is here to look at those problems and solve it by making me take my car off the road because it is polluting the atmosphere. I'll listen out here for the answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your call and your question.
I would start by saying, yes, there's a building board, and all requests go through them in terms of building. And sometimes you find that people just get up and build. So perhaps there is a case or two out there of that. And as I said, sometimes there are gaps, sometimes they're beyond our control. And so we continue, and we will continue to work with the building board to ensure that we eliminate such examples. But the caller brought to a point about cars and the emissions.
Yes.
And that is something for us to note and put our feelers out there as to what is happening. And what I mean by that, by extension, is that we at the department have to strengthen our data collection. And that is something we have been discussing, Ms. Sheffield, strengthen our data collection. Because generally, as a people, fiction-based, but we have to transform to becoming more evidence-based.
Yes.
So we have to collect that data about the cars and the gases they emit and how they impact us, so that we can take it forward to the minister and cabinet to say, look, this is the situation. It may take action A, B, C, or D. What do you think?
You know, one of the issues that I see is that we have had over the years a phenomenal increase in the number of vehicles that we have in St. Kitts. It simply means then that the gases that they emit is greater in terms of what's going on in the atmosphere, the pollution. But at the very same time, the problem is in the urban area, in the city center.
Yes, it is.
Where you have, so many vehicles and the pollution that there is. Not just traffic congestion, but the level of pollution. Because if you're going to have so many vehicles in the city center, that I was thinking, that perhaps, you can park outside of the city center, and you can either walk into the city center, or bicycle into the city center, or be shuttled into the city center, or something like that, which will cut down.
Of course.
Yes.
On the level of gases, the greenhouse, the carbon emissions and so on, where you have that congestion of so many people.
Of course.
And also the development of more green spaces.
Yes. Yes. And these are discussions we would want to take forward with the physical planning.
Yes.
Because, sounds very good in our discussions, but, you have to face all the citizens out there who would say, oh, well, I can't walk in town?
Yes.
I can't park in town? So these are developmental conversations that we can have, that we can see transforming our country in the next 10 to 20 years.
Yes, actually, the discussions would have started many years ago about the same suggestions you'd have made, Mr. Williams, about mass transport, trying to make Bastille greener in terms of pedestrianizing most of the streets. A few years ago when 4th Street was resurfaced, that was the intent when they had put in the...
Well, cricket.
Yes, it was just the intent was to pedestrianize 4th Street and other streets in the Bastille, but to do that you must have a mechanism in place to ensure that persons have access to get into the Bastille area. That is one area. And just to say, since COVID, we've heard this term all of society approach. And to respond to the caller in terms of the action that took place in the gut, we have to be our neighbor's keeper. And if someone recognizes an activity that appears to be illegal, all they have to do is take up the phone, and because the system in place at the physical planning where you can report illegal activity, and then they will do the necessary investigations.
Okay, we have a caller. Working for you, good afternoon.
Yeah, I come back with another one, and I hope I can get an answer.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if them two young ladies here walk around when we had a disease in the cane field called smut.
Yes.
Right, we're looking at the 29 Calypso about it.
Yes, smut.
Yes.
All over the place.
Yeah, now, suppose a farmer has to realize around his farm there is a lot of smut. What you all think he should do with that? Because flitting smut cannot kill them. So he will have to go back to the method that they used when they discovered that all the cane field them had in smut. So they will have to excuse the farmer for destroying them with fire. So let's not be here again. Thanks.
Yeah, he has raised an important thing there in terms of agriculture and the environment.
Yes.
For example, the use of fertilizers and so on, and probably how those get into the soil and getting into the water table and and things like that.
There have been collaborations with the Ministry of Agriculture just prior to the last election. We were actually part of that ministry, so the collaborations even further, but the management and use of pesticides and fertilizers is the responsibility of the Department of Agriculture, or by extension the ministry. And we would have recognized that there's actually a pesticide board, and on that board, again, our office is represented. And so our concerns in terms of how things are done in a coordinated manner would be reflected and addressed there. So to respond to the call in terms of the SWOT, it would not be the responsibility of the Department of Environment, but we would provide the necessary supporting role to show that if you take this, perhaps this initiative, this what could happen to the environment, so we will recommend that you perhaps look at an alternative. But in terms of the actual lead, it will be led by the Department of Agriculture.
Right. Now, we started our discussion on cooperatives, and we need to say something on that before we leave. Of course, you started giving a definition of cooperatives, Ms. Rattan. What about what are the benefits of cooperatives. Why are they so important?
How? Well, based on the definition, you know, they're not small business. They're not even micro. They're helping each other and coming together with agriculture or products of agriculture that helps them to create a niche market. I think I was talking about self-reliance before we received the calls. And it's a way of ensuring that we can feed ourselves with healthy foods. And at the same time, we can be creative with the byproducts of some of these foods. One of the exciting moments for me.
But not all cooperatives are about food, though.
No, because I'm just going to tell you about the byproducts.
Right.
We have
agricultural cooperatives.
Agricultural cooperatives.
What are they?
They come together.
No, we have cooperatives. What are the cooperatives that we have here in the Federation?
Oh, we have about 12. We have
about 12 cooperatives.
And some are agricultural in terms of farming. Some are food processing. Yes. Right. Fishing.
Okay.
We have some fishers.
Right.
Cooperatives. And as I was saying, the byproducts, some of the exciting moments for me, having been assigned here, is looking at the byproducts of the cooperatives. I mean, and the new things. One of the things I love is mango. You know, you have guava cheese.
Yes.
There is an agro-processor. They call themselves Sugartown Organics by Anastasia Elliott. They have sorrel cheese, gooseberry cheese, mango cheese. Yes, and the plum on you see the
blackberry?
Plum that we grow, the blackberry that we grow there on the Kim Collins Highway. They make the cheese from it. So it's such a joy. I was just so enamored by eating that different product. And they have pepper jelly. And then you have Mother Becky now using the bush teas, all the bush teas, and he has them packaged to make the tea actually, but he has the iced tea. And that is all. It's just so exciting. And in some of them, I think we are going to have to be encouraging some beauty products, because they're making soaps, they're making oils. And Foy's women in particular, there's one of them, it's just women, Foy's women, they do wines. Sugartown Organics also does wine. And they do wine, aloe vera wine, all sorts of wines, guava wine, all sorts. But they have particular challenges. Now, this is a sector that you would want to promote, because you want to promote local products. It's a niche area. It also could be used in tourism. This is our local product. Instead of a glass of red wine, you can have guava wine. You can have an aloe vera wine. But it has some particular challenges in terms of a space to work from, storage, their standards that they have to meet, and we are connected to the Bureau of Standards, who works alongside these persons so that they could know what standards they would need in order to export the local product, or to make the local product cheap. The problem we have, and that issue with plastic and glass, their cost of production is high. Without understanding the sector, and the Ministry of Finance will be key in this, to help us to help them to be more present in the market.
Yes, and
that is one of their challenges, because what we see now, they get a lot of guidance from the Department of Cooperatives, because they help them to learn how to put their business together, how to take the minutes, that kind of thing. They have their minutes, their accounting.
So there's that collaboration in terms of
that's the main
entrepreneurship,
role.
collaborative entrepreneurship.
And they help to regularize them. They help to make sure they maintain their standards. But of course, you know, it is not a really small business, and it's based on trust. So you still have that human factor that they struggle with all the time. But they mainly look at, they regulate them, and they give them that sort of support.
Right.
Yes.
And the economic benefit from being together.
Is
greater.
Is greater. But everybody is not convinced of that as yet, because there are certain peculiarities. Because one or two of the complaints to do like Mother Becky tea, they're in glass bottles, so his production cost is higher. So you could get cheaper juice in the supermarket, not healthy, but cheaper than his healthy iced bush tea.
Right. So therefore, you can use local resources.
Local resources. And we can eat healthier. There's also that connection with health. The Ministry of Health, we can eat healthier. But they need to be given the opportunity, and that's what in 2021 we'll be working on trying to find out what is the balance to help them with their cost of production.
Yes.
And to help them to be more confident and stronger in their business.
So this is something that you would encourage in the communities, in
Yes.
the individual communities.
Yes, and based on what I've been seeing with COVID,
And the community benefits.
the community benefits from it. And have you been to Fresh Finds lately? You know Fresh Finds?
No.
It's something launched by the Rams group of companies the last Saturday in every month. They have this platform called Fresh Finds. You register, you go there. You know how many new local businesses I have seen there? I didn't get to go to the one last for November, but I was there in September and October. New beauty products, soaps, oils, new ways of eating, vegan ice cream. You see everything, people making earrings. So many more persons are making earrings. I saw one day, I bought kettle corn, popcorn. You know, so the atmosphere, I think, is ripened and is ripening. But we have to work so that we could find out what their peculiarities are, so that they can be more visible in our thing. We had, where we provided the opportunity, and on Friday the 27th, last Friday, we had Agro Strip. That area has been identified for them.
Yes.
And we had an impactful Agro Strip 2020 there, where all of them, they came up, people had lobsters, they got them for $15 a pound. The shopping was throughout the day. Everybody came, people came and they shopped. And their prices are cheaper. So that's one thing to purchase from them. Their prices are cheaper.
Right.
And there was a wide variety of products on display. So we are working with them.
Right.
We have certain peculiarities, but we are working with them, and there's a lot of potential to expand.
Right, because you recognize the benefits in terms of even cooperatives reducing poverty.
Yes.
People in the community coming together, they're pooling their resources to solve problems, identify common goals, and
feeding themselves.
Feeding themselves and targeting the causes and the symptoms of poverty.
Exactly. And it is a sustainable pillar also. I think there's a call. I see a hand.
Working for you, good afternoon.
Working for you, that's why.
How are you, sir?
I'm fine. And the beautiful ladies, they're sounding so good around the world.
Yes.
That's why I want to pose two questions to the ladies.
Yes.
It's a serious challenge at Baker's Point, over by the shooting range, where our truckers in St. Kitts don't understand that the danger they're doing is undermining. And I want to get to these ladies, the permanent secretary and the other lady who is very fine in she delivery, to get to the crusher and get some bowlers and block off these trucks and pour the morning going down there, but can't mind. It's dangerous, and we're not going to play with it.
Yes.
Several old men come from the area, they come right in moonlight, moonlight Roberts University. Come look for me in the chance, and they crack me over there and they show me. And I know the area, and it's dangerous, that's why.
Yes.
Another thing I want to talk about is the environment. Why they ain't bringing the information to us more, awareness and education? I heard Ms. Watson talk about it, and that is key, because our people just sitting back and don't understand the danger of climate change. And I'm warning you all, the Rastaman included everything, you know. And all you got to understand what's going on. And next thing I heard the lady was talking about the paper bag going to the shop long time ago. It came paper bag alone. We parents gone, dead gone. All of them used to get a great bag, and you go to the grocery shop with that bag. So we got to get back there. Otherwise, we will never get fish. How we used to get fish to eat. Have a good day, ladies.
Thank you very much.
And you all need to come to working for you more often. Why are you running? I could talk. I could talk better than any CNN news reporter. Have a good.
Thank you very much. He's mentioned some very good points in terms of, truckers and the whole thing of the sand mining. And at the very same time, we are talking here of people making a livelihood, but at the very same time, there is some form of environmental degradation with the removal of the sand and so on. And, he mentioned, of course, the whole area of the plastic. Ms. Jeffers.
Yes, sand mining is our greatest challenge.
Yes, I was just going to say sand mining has and continues to be a significant challenge. There's a task force, for want of a better term. It requires collaboration between the Department of Environment and Public Works to manage the control of sand mining. And so there's a system in place, but one of the challenges that we've had is that most of the truckers would mine sand outside of the regular hours. So you may be driving or living along the, let's just say, Connery area, and trucks may be passing at times when most persons will be sleeping, and it is when sand is moving. And so, but outside of that, we have been putting documentation together to show that sand mining, while we have the sand now, in a few years or maybe even less, no more sand will be there for construction. And we may have to start to consider the importation of sand, and that will have some serious rippling effects, particularly as relates to finances, because it may be much more expensive in terms of the cost, and it boils back down to the average man. But sand mining has been a challenge for many, many years. For Nevis, sand mining has been banned for many years, but for St. Kitts, it continues to be a challenge, but it comes back again to data, and the caller would have mentioned.
What is the environmental impact, though?
Outside of landslides and land slippage and stuff like that, because sand, it takes years to build up, but the rate of the removal of it is much faster than it's
so
been
it
able
is
to
not
rebuild
sustainable.
up. It has not been sustainable managed at the moment, no. Perhaps for the most part because the truckers are not adhering to the requirements and standards. There's a process in place, but we've had challenges with the truckers adhering to the policies that are in place.
Right, and so many problems are linked to unsustainable practices. We've heard about overfishing. You're fishing at a faster rate in which the fish can replenish, and it's the very same thing you're talking about with the sand and so on. And these are not sustainable practices and so on, because you need to give the natural environment enough time to replenish. Otherwise, then we have a problem on our hands.
Yes, so we want to use the opportunity again, similar to the call I would have made about the construction of the house in the gut, for persons who recognize that the activities are taking place within the sand mining. Call the office 466-8535 and we will respond, because if we are to take a case to court, we have to have the evidence to support. We cannot go on hearsay and stuff like that. We have to be able to have the evidence to support our situation within the court. So if we are imploring all the community and the residents to help us to help each other, if you recognize something is taking place within the environment that is not conducive towards sustainability, call us and we will respond accordingly.
Right.
And
now,
we're
basically out of time.
Yes,
but
the other pressure is that now we have to think about how we could better police it, and that takes more resources, and that is a challenge. But one of the things I need to say before we close, we are looking forward to a new bill. It got a first reading, but we went back to some of our stakeholders and we are making some amendments, which we can address or give some more teeth to activities of this nature.
Right, but before we go, just for maybe for 2-3 minutes, Ms. Jeffers, what are some of the key legislation that the Department of Environment has?
To respond, Ms. Rattan would have mentioned about the draft NCMA bill, but for the most part, the work of the environment is driven by NCEPA, which is the National Conservation, Environment and Protection Act. That is the same bill that Ms. Ratton would have mentioned that would be amended and put forward to Cabinet for second reading, a new bill rather. But outside of that, there are various legislative in terms of policy frameworks. There's a biosafety policy that basically governs in terms of how do we handle and dispose of okay, let me talk about the climate change policy, which is easier for me to speak about. There's a national climate change policy which provides an overarching principle in terms of how do we govern the climate change. There's one that was passed just last year or maybe early this year in terms of the handling of genetically modified goods and services. There's another one that in terms of the genetic resources. Sometimes we have persons coming into the country taking bits and pieces of our resources to do research, and the government and country and people does not get the benefits that is accorded. But we now have the legislative framework in place where there's a process in terms of who is collecting it, why, and the research, and everything comes back in terms of benefit towards the country. So those are three main areas that I can speak to, but in terms of the overarching act, it is governed by the NCEPA, which will be replaced by NCEMA after it is passed by the Cabinet.
Ms. Rattan?
Yes, so in 2021 we can look forward to strengthen interministerial coordination, strengthen legislative framework, and an increased public outreach for both environment and cooperatives. Because we want persons to know we have to focus on self-reliance, and that has to help us to shape ourselves in the future, in the next 30 years.
Yes.
But I would recommend, Mr. Williams, that we perhaps come back when we are closer just to deal with the acts. Because, we have not dealt with one entire section, because environment also includes our cultural artifacts and preserving them. So I think when we are going to send the proposed bill back to Parliament, it will be another opportunity for us to discuss in detail.
You are very welcome, indeed. So I want to thank you, Ms. Rattan, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Environment and Cooperatives, and Ms. Cheryl Jeffers, Conservation Officer, who gave us quite a lot of food for thought. She is Conservation Officer in the Department of Cooperatives. I want to thank...
Environment.
Sorry, in environment.
Yes.
That's my... In environment. I want to thank both of you very much. It has indeed been a pleasure to have you on Working for You. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. You're welcome.
You have been listening to another edition of Working for You. Next week we will be back talking about family matters from the Department of Gender Affairs. I am Les Roy Williams. Until then, thank you very much for tuning in and listening in to this program, our callers and our listeners. And next week, we will be back. Take care.